shoes and out the door. 5, I'm alive. 6, 7, 8, feeling great.
Hello and welcome back to Beyond Your Wildest Genes podcast. My name is Dr. Noah DeCoyer and I am your co-host. Today our guest is Purkh Singh Khalsa. KP is one of the country's foremost natural healing experts and is the recent President Emeritus of the American Herbalists Guild and is Director for the National Ayurvedic Medical Association. He mentored in Ayurveda with Yogi Bhajan for 32 years. Along the way, he incorporated deep studies in Western and traditional Chinese medicine. His school has been training professional Ayurvedic practitioners, nutritional therapists, and herbalists for over 30 years. KP has presented over 200 times at professional conferences, has written over 3,000 articles on health topics, and is the author or editor of 30 books on health, including his latest, The Way of Ayurvedic Herbs. He teaches Ayurveda, herbalism, and nutrition at 2 naturopathic universities. KP worked as the senior research scientist and herbalist for Yoga Teas for 30 years, holds credentials as a state-certified dietitian-nutritionist, nationally certified Ayurvedic practitioner, nationally registered herbalist, nationally certified massage therapist, nationally registered yoga instructor, and is the only American to hold the title Yogaraj in Ayurveda. KP is also the first person to be dual credentialed in herbalism and Ayurveda. Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about preventing and treating dementia. KP, how are you today?
Doing well, Noah. Thanks very much for having me.
Excellent. Now, before we get started in the topic, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your journey?
Well, like many healers, I have sort of the wounded healer story. I was diagnosed at age 10 with a crippling degenerative spinal disease that's invariably fatal by age 40. Of course, at age 10, it's hard to comprehend that, so I didn't really absorb that very well, but gradually it began to get more and more debilitating, and I had daily pain by the time I was in high school. So I was pretty motivated to do something. When I was a teenager, I took a yoga class during the hippie days, and more out of interest in consciousness and spiritual practice, but I found out that it made my back feel better for the first time ever. And I said, well, if there's one thing that can be of benefit, there must be other things. And I began to investigate. And sure enough, slowly but surely, you got to remember, this was 45 years ago. So what we think of as routine today, things like herbs and vitamins, just didn't exist. So it was a long, slow grind. But over time, I eventually got well. And I'm well past 40 now and have no difficulties with that situation. And I just fell in love with the whole idea of helping your body heal itself.
I, for one, am very interested in our talk today because I know a little bit about Ayurveda. I know that it is it's one of the oldest healing arts. Can you explain Ayurveda to us in general, just what it is?
Yeah, sure. Just to clarify, my journey so far has not included dementia, so we'll see what happens. But I'm doing the things that we talk about. I have forgotten my car keys a couple times, but so far I think it's okay. Ayurveda is the oldest natural healing system continuously practiced on planet Earth, at least as far as we know. Ayurveda was already in its ascendancy 5,000 years ago, and people were literate very early in the culture of South Asia, so they wrote things down, and we have the things that they wrote during that time. We think archaeologically that it's the mother healing system of both Chinese medicine, which was a spin-off, and Western medicine. There was contact between the Hippocratic practitioners in Greece and the Ayurvedic practitioners in India at that time. So Ayurveda has had this long continuous practice for this extended period of time. It's a total lifestyle system that includes literally everything you do in your life, from diet to exercise to when you sleep and how you drink and everything possible. These days, Ayurveda is growing rapidly in the United States, especially with yoga becoming more popular. People are giving it more attention. Ayurveda is the same thing as yoga. We often call them sister sciences, but really even that is inaccurate because they're the same thing. Ayurvedic physicians practice and recommend yoga, and yoga teachers like my mentor Yogi Bhajan are more known as yoga teachers, but in fact practice and recommend Ayurveda.
Yeah, in fact, in our office on Monday, and we have it every month, we have a lady that comes in and she's a yoga practitioner, but she also does Tibetan singing bowls, and she does a concert in our office once a month. So it's really exciting. We love it, and I'm looking forward to our class on Monday. Now, when we talk about dementia and Ayurveda, why do you find that to be such an important topic?
Well, first, let me clarify that my experience is pretty broad-based. So my fundamental training is in Ayurveda. But again, when I began studying with my mentor when I was a teenager, there just wasn't much in the way of natural healing. So he sent me out to all kinds of people, and I mentored with many of the giants of the previous generation, naturopathic physicians and Chinese practitioners. And, you know, we were all kind of searching in the same pool at that time. Dementia is especially important because our modern lifestyle has set the stage for the incredible rise in dementia, especially Alzheimer's disease, that's happening in this generation. So we've now identified many risk factors for dementia, which include things like a whole slew of nutrient deficiencies, vitamin D deficiency, for example, from not being out in the sun anymore. Lack of exercise, eating funky diets. So we're seeing this tremendous upsurge in Alzheimer's. The United States is number 3 in Alzheimer's statistics, whereas India is number 116.
Wow.
So there's a lot of difference between the United States and India, and it's hard to pin it down to just one thing. But there's just an example of a pre-industrial culture that keeps their marbles well into advanced age, whereas we have advanced modern technomedicine, and yet we're unable to keep people mentally sound, as they age. So it's going to be an increasing problem, and many people are predicting that dementia is going to be the health condition that basically busts the American healthcare system.
Can you repeat that for our audience again? Because I think that is incredibly important. You said the United States is number 3 and India is number 116, did you say?
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you look at the statistics on Alzheimer's incidence, there are about 150 countries in the world. And once you get past India, you don't get very good statistics because they tend to be developing countries. But India has pretty good statistics. The top 10 are almost all temperate climate, northerly latitude, industrialized countries. Iceland, Finland, Switzerland, the Scandinavian countries in general. Top 5 are all Northern European countries other than the United States. And then it just sort of goes down the list in terms of degree of industrialization, degree of northerly latitude. And it's pretty predictable.
And that would bode well for the reason why vitamin D is so important, right? The higher you are in latitude, the less sun, less vitamin D, correct?
That's exactly right. And, Ayurveda predicted this long, long ago and said that people who live in cold climates have more difficulty with dementia. And, India is a huge country, and so there are people living way up into the snowy Himalayas and people living down, way down into the brutally hot south. So the practitioners over the last 5,000 years were able to make these comparisons. So we don't know all the details, but vitamin D definitely seems to be a culprit, and there's an absolute connection between a whole bunch of nervous diseases, in fact, including multiple sclerosis and fibromyalgia, that exactly follow the vitamin D exposure curve.
I believe that's the same for cancer as well, correct?
You're absolutely right. Yep.
All right. So we've kind of just talked about vitamin D already. We talked about northern latitudes. What are other factors that are causing dementia to be the problem of dementia to increase and be on the rise?
Well, the number one thing that everybody's attention has been drawn to in the last decade is inflammation. People are now thinking of Alzheimer's. And first, let's just clarify that there are many, many types of senile dementia, the dementia of aging, and some strike earlier, some strike later. Alzheimer's is the most common, but we've had an 8-fold increase in Alzheimer's in the United States in the last 60 years. It used to be that Alzheimer's rates in the United States were about 2% of total population, and now that's increased by eightfold, and it's just going up like a rocket. So the focus on Alzheimer's is just because that disease in particular has had such an enormous rapid rise, and it accounts for most of the dementia. So now we know, as we go into the brain and look to see what's actually happening in the neurons, the damage that occurs, that's very characteristic and is very obvious under a microscope, is highly linked with inflammation. And we have a diet and lifestyle in the United States that's very pro-inflammatory. People used to eat a lot of inflammatory foods, things like colored berries, and of course even simple things like green leaves and root vegetables that they don't eat anymore. So our attempt to survive on donuts and coffee for the last 3 generations hasn't worked out very well. White flour and white sugar tend to cause bursts of insulin release, which is pro-inflammatory, and that causes damage throughout the body. Certainly we know about the cardiovascular system, but recently we've begun to understand that that damage extends to the brain. As these neurons get inflamed, it disrupts their normal homeostasis, and they begin to develop these characteristic tangles of protein that eventually kill the neurons. So you've got everything that we do in modern life is pro-inflammatory. So eating the actual lack of the nutrients from not eating those foods, the substitution of things that we do eat, like refined carbohydrates, all those dietarily promote inflammation. Then stress promotes inflammation. Lack of sleep, we've just been seeing, the headlines have just been full of sleep studies over the last couple of years. Just a couple major ones came out just this week showing the damage from lack of sleep. So we just got the trifecta in the United States in terms of things that we do that we now know enhance inflammation and stress the brain, and the ultimate result is diseases like Alzheimer's. Yeah,
so let me just recap that, because one of the things I strive for is just for people to really have strong takeaways on the podcast. Dementia is on the increase because of stress, an inflammatory diet, and sleep. Would that be a correct statement?
Yeah, that's very much the takeaway.
Great. Now, you talked a lot about diet already. Does your lifestyle, your coaching, your teaching, does that have a place for meat and fish and poultry in your diet, or do you think that's something that should not be included in our daily diet as humans?
Well, it's a question of any given person's metabolism and their tolerance of those things. Some people metabolize flesh food pretty well and are able to get it in and out of the body and use the nutrients and digest it. From the Ayurvedic perspective, you're allowed to eat anything that you can digest. So as long as it doesn't cause a slowdown of your digestive tract or produce undesirable byproducts that your body has to deal with, then it's not a moral question, it's a medical question. There's a lot of emphasis on using fish because it includes the oil of the flesh of the fish that's quite anti-inflammatory. So it depends on how the animal was raised, how the flesh was processed. So I think there's probably a limit. But again, some people would say it's the difference between wild game versus commercially prepared things. You take a cow, and instead of having it eat grass, you have it eat corn for the last 6 months of its life. The inflammatory chemicals in its flesh just skyrocket. Thing is, we have to study this a lot more. Recently, with the popularity of the paleo diet, there have been a lot of apologists for a much higher meat diet, and that hasn't really been studied very well. What we do know is that vegetarian diets across the board have been studied extensively and tend to lead to less inflammation, but we don't really know whether that's because of the lack of meat or the preponderance of vegetable foods with things like the purple pigments from fruits and the magnesium content of the green vegetables, that sort of thing. We just really don't know the answer from a scientific perspective, but you have to digest the food that you eat, and then you look for signs of inflammation, which is basically a body just running hotter and faster than it should. If a person feels hot all the time, if their heart is beating faster than it should, if their blood pressure is high, and then there are various tests that you can measure, C-reactive protein and other blood tests of inflammation. We pretty much are able to nail down the inflammatory state of a person now, and then you can try them with various diets and see how it works.
I think that's an incredibly important point, saying that with your practice and your teaching and in Ayurveda, that it's really individualistic. That there's some people that can handle a higher meat or flesh or fish or poultry diet, and other people should really focus much more on a vegetarian style diet. I think that's a very, very important point, to be individualistic. And then, and I guess across the board, whether you eat meat, don't eat meat, a vegetarian, I guess consuming a wide variety of colors, vegetables, and fruits are crucially important. Would you agree?
Oh, that's the key. And in fact, in the scientific research, the diet that wins out over and over and over is the so-called Mediterranean diet. Now, that diet attempts to mimic or follow the diet that people in lesser developed Mediterranean cultures like Greek islands eat. The problem is that it's hard to mimic that because those people eat a lot of grapes. They they grow their own vegetables. They do tend to have a low meat diet, although they're relatively a low protein diet across the board. But they walk up and down steep paths on their island all day long. They have great social contacts. I mean, who could be stressed living on a Greek island, right? So all those factors, you don't have someone commuting an hour each way on the freeway and working in a factory and eating a donut for breakfast. So there's so many different factors. Anyway, in our best efforts to replicate those diets, we come up with a diet that's exactly what you said. Eat the rainbow, a wide variety of colors, high vegetable content, and relatively minimal animal flesh protein consumption. Several studies have shown that, and most experts are saying that's the diet to aspire to for Alzheimer's prevention.
So we're talking about Alzheimer's, dementia prevention, and you mentioned stress and sleep. What are your thoughts and maybe some tips on stress reduction and improved sleep?
Well, all of these things are so tightly laced together that you really just have to take a look at your entire lifestyle and decide how you can gradually adjust things to be able to get these things to work. You take the average person who has been sleep deprived for their entire life and then just tell them, well, sleep 2 more hours a night. That's a great suggestion, but their lifestyle is already set up in such a way that they don't know how to do it. They have late night business meetings or PTA meetings or entertainment, and then they have to get up at 5 o'clock to hit the freeway to go to work. So you really have to look at, number one, just planning to get that extra sleep and then winding down at night before sleep. When we used to live in caves, as the dusk came around, people would, sit around the fire and chat and do some crafts or something and gradually go back to the back of the cave where it was jet black and sleep all night and then come out with the sunrise. We're so far from that now that, it's just a lot to do. Stress-wise, you mentioned yoga and meditation, which is, of course, what I practice and what I recommend. Some sort of stress-reducing practice. There are 1,000 types of meditation, but it's just one way to not be reactive to those things in your life. Every time you have road rage from someone cutting you off in the freeway, your body releases fight or flight chemicals that end up damaging your cardiovascular system and your brain. And people who have learned to control those things and not be reactive in those situations. Your boss jumps out at you and demands that you stay all weekend to write a report. Now you're soaked in stress chemicals. So it's a combination of foresight and planning and then learning how to deal with these things logically and rationally and cognitively, but also not getting upset by them when they do happen. Everybody's going to have difficult things to handle in their life, and it's always going to be difficult driving on the freeway, and your spouse is always going to have something to say to you. So you have to have some sort of cognitive mechanism to not react to those things.
That's true. Now, obviously, the best method of learning these kinds of things like meditation and yoga is to go to classes and have mentors. Just in our technological age, are there any apps that you could recommend, meditation apps or anything that people can just download on their phone to help them if they don't have the chance to go to a class or work with somebody?
Yeah, there are some that I would recommend, but I'm not prepared with those.
Okay.
At the moment, I typically don't use those, but I do know of a few that I like. And sure, that would be a fine way to do it. It doesn't have to be any particular thing. It could be Tai Chi or whatever. What I see most people doing is, getting up in the morning in a huge rush, dashing off, dealing with stress all day long, fight or flight all day, eating crap throughout the day, coming home wasted, and then watching TV for 4 hours while they consume 3 glasses of alcoholic beverage. That's not a healthy lifestyle. And instead of doing that, take one of those hours that you otherwise would just be wasted in front of the TV and go to a Tai Chi class. And gradually, that's sort of the thin end of the wedge that begins to open up these things. And you feel so great at the end of the Tai Chi class that you want more of those ideas. And then that motivates you to start having broccoli for dinner instead of, hamburger helper.
Right. That echoes what happened into your life, right? You took, I forget what you said, you did a yoga class, and that opened up the whole universe to where we sit today, correct?
Well, that's exactly right. I had a very conventional upbringing, and grew up on white bread and all the usual. And I had this disease, and then as I began to change my lifestyle, it was a yoga class that opened the door. But again, in the hippie era, people were experimenting with all kinds of things. I was also buying tofu out of a giant barrel at the health food store that was the size of my bedroom.
Now, are there any foods that you would say are totally off limits for someone who's concerned about dementia or Alzheimer's?
Yes, but interestingly, we just had in nutritional therapy class last weekend, we just had this discussion about sugar. Everybody in the class, the demographic is a 27-year-old woman who's retraining for a second career as a nutritional therapist. And we were talking about sugar, and one of the women just said, "Well, KP, how much sugar do you eat?" And I said, "Well, none." And the whole class just went deathly silent, like I'd been swearing or something, like the idea of having no sugar at all. And I just said, "Look, if you invited me over to your home at night and you made a cookie for dessert, I would eat it. It's not like it's a crime to eat it, but I don't have it at my house. I don't eat it on a regular basis. And, 2-3 times a year I have a sugar cookie. It's not the end of the world." And they just couldn't process that. I mean, their idea of limiting sugar was having, 3 things a day that had sugar instead of sugar with every single meal, and, 2 sodas with their 16 teaspoons of sugar every day. So, could you tolerate, a little bit of refined sugar here and there? Yeah, but refined carbohydrates would be the number one thing, and then just devitalized food in general, something that, instead of steaming a beet and just eating it and enjoy it, you're eating, deep fried processed beet chips, that kind of thing, just sort of getting back to the basics. And that's what really tends to work well for people. But it's always got to be a gradual process. When you tell people to white knuckle it, they always go back to failure.
Right. Now, I think we know the answer, but as our societies live longer, if we continue to live the lifestyle that we live, I guess we can expect more cognitive decline, quicker, faster, and more commonly, correct?
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious. We won't know the official scientific answer to that until it happens, but the trend is unmistakable. So yes, we do want to live longer. We've done a great job of letting people live longer by preventing crises. We don't have cholera epidemics or pneumonia epidemics that sweep through cultures. People aren't, cutting their foot, chopping firewood and dying of an infection, or falling off their horse and bonking their head. So as they make it into elderhood, these chronic things add up, and that's the presumed reason that dementia is increasing, and it's only going to continue to increase. So we have to do everything possible to prevent it, and it's largely lifestyle.
Cool. Now, I have a list of a few short remedies, and I was wondering if you can give us your ideas on how they can affect healthy cognition and aging. So the first one, and it's one of the few supplements that I take every day, is turmeric. What's your thoughts there?
Oh, this is the number one researched substance in all science, conventional and alternative. And this came from that India statistic I gave you, was that researchers looked at that and said, well, they're doing something in India that's really working. What is it? Oh, don't they eat that food with that yellow stuff in it? And we just thought of turmeric as something to color mustard here. But the scientists looked at that and did some animal experiments and said, well, that's working. So they took, demented mice and gave them turmeric, and their dementia was diminished. And so they said, well, let's search for the magic bullet in there. So turmeric has 10,000 phytochemicals, and scientists found the magic bullet, curcumin, which is one of the most profoundly anti-inflammatory substances in nature, and just sort of settled on that. So just the other day, I looked up the number of turmeric studies that have been done, about 50,000 turmeric studies in the literature. That's a mind-blowing number, with about 2,000 of them having been done. This was about two-thirds of the way through last year already by that time. So it's just an explosion. So curcumin is anti-inflammatory and that's presumed to be the reason that it benefits Alzheimer's. We don't have a lot of human studies on that yet. They're starting to come out now, but the animal studies are incredibly compelling. So the average Indian person just eats a gram or two of turmeric a day, but they do it from birth through life. So presumably taking a bit of curcumin as a supplement or including turmeric in your diet will be the main thing that we know that will benefit Alzheimer's in the future.
Great. Now, I would imagine using turmeric or actually getting the root, it would be better than getting some sort of standardized supplement. I mean, that's what I take, a standardized supplement, but I guess incorporating both would be a really good idea.
Well, the problem here is that there's relatively little curcumin in turmeric. So in order to get a significant dose of curcumin, you have to eat a lot of turmeric, which becomes problematic for people with the taste. So probably some of both. Turmeric does 200 plus things that we know in the body so far, because it contains many other different things. It's antimicrobial, it's astringent, it just does so many things in addition to what the curcumin does. So adding significant amounts of turmeric in your diet would get you all those other phytochemicals, and then you could take a standardized supplement of the curcumin. I do the same thing that you do, take a standardized curcumin supplement every day, but I also take generous turmeric in my food.
Great point. Next remedy, huperzine.
Yeah, boy, this is the best memory enhancer I've ever seen. In terms of baby boomers who forget their car keys, this is just magic. People come back and tell me, I used to forget something. You know, I walk into the kitchen and forget what I was there for, and 2 weeks with huperzine, and that just all was erased. Very, very dramatic. I was doing an internship with a conventional neurologist the other day, and he recommended huperzine to somebody. We didn't know each other. I was just a fly on the wall in his office, and it'd been recommended by a colleague, and he recommended huperzine. I said, this guy's got something going. And so on the break, we began talking, and it turned out that he, in fact, used a whole bunch of alternative kinds of remedies, and huperzine was his main one. It increases acetylcholine production in the brain, and that's the main neurotransmitter involved in Alzheimer's. So again, human studies are scarce so far, but the animal studies look great. And he said it's the best overall brain health enhancer for every neurotransmitter disease that he's ever found, and I would agree. It's an extract from a Chinese moss. Increases awareness, vigilance, cognition, ability to solve problems, short-term memory especially. It's really dramatic.
Cool. Great. That's great information. And that's easy to get anywhere. I mean, you could buy that in the online in a high quality. Like, what is a good company to purchase huperzine from? You know,
huperzine is absolutely generic. It's extracted from this Chinese moss, and there's only a couple companies in the world that do that extraction. So everybody has to get their huperzine from the same source, and it would all be basically generic.
Great. Go-to cola.
Gotu is the #1 nerve tonic, nerve healer in the world, from my point of view. It's a simple little flimsy salad vegetable, kind of like parsley, but it's the #1 remedy in South Asian medicine for overall brain and nerve healing. So it increases all those things we just talked about, like the huperzine, but it's much slower, much milder, and you can use it as a food. If you know how to use spinach, you could use Gotu cooked into your food, or you can take it as tea in high doses. So that's the #1 Ayurvedic go-to for any nerve disorder. The thing is, it's mild and slow, so you're not looking at dramatic improvement over a couple weeks like a huperzine. You're looking at many weeks or months as a long-term healer, but also a preventive.
Bacopa.
Bacopa is another herb very similar to Gotu. It's a little bit more potent. It's a little more bitter. and not so suitable as a culinary remedy, but easy to find as a supplement. And hundreds of studies on Bacopa in the scientific literature. Kids take it to increase their SAT scores in India.
Ooh, that's a good point for my sons to remember that. I'm very familiar with ginkgo. I think that's been in the literature quite a bit. I have a couple ginkgo trees right around the block from my house. Tell us what's so great about ginkgo.
Ginkgo increases circulation throughout the body, but since it increases circulation to the head, it became very famous very quickly a couple decades ago. And not only does it increase circulation to the brain, so it treats cerebrovascular insufficiency, which is one of the main factors of dementia in elders in the United States. Their blood just doesn't get up to their head because of gravity. It also enhances the function of the neurons in a very broad, beneficial way. So it's one of the most significant things. If you lived in Europe on your 50th birthday, when you had your physical, your doctor would write a prescription for ginkgo automatically because it just has so many benefits for elders. Ginkgo has just a mountain of literature, mainly on people with cognitive decline. We don't really know very well yet what it does for people with normal cognition or to prevent cognitive decline, because the hundreds of studies have mainly been done for people who are already losing their marbles.
Maybe you can answer this question for me. My last two homes, there's been quite a bit of ginkgo trees around, and in the late fall, they drop their leaves turn a beautiful yellow. They also drop a fruit, and invariably, the Asian people that live around me, they come and they pick those fruit up. Do you know what they're doing with the ginkgo fruit?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a snack. People like enjoying it as a snack. Ginkgo seed it's the seed. You open up the fruit and you get the seed. The seeds are green and they're sort of like a peanut. And you just toast it a little bit of oil and salt, kind of like eating a peanut. It's a very minor medicine in Chinese traditional medicine. It's used mainly for asthma. So in large doses, you get kind of a minor bronchodilation effect. But the people who are picking it are just enjoying it as a snack.
So you're not eating the flesh. You're actually looking for the seed is what you're saying.
Yeah, you open up the flesh and dry out those green nuts inside and toast them up like you would a peanut.
Wow, great. I'm so happy I asked you that question. I've been wondering for years.
Yeah, you could give it a try. You want to wait until the fruit falls off the tree because that's when it's ripe enough that the seed has developed, and then you can open up the flesh. They're stinky when you open.
Yes, they sure as heck are. That I agree with you.
Flesh is stinky, so you have to open that up and then let the seeds dry out for a day or so, and then they can be pretty tasty. I usually try to get some every year.
There's no doubt I'm going to try that. Thank you. I'm so excited about that. Cool. Now, we talked about it, but give us a little bit more about vitamin D.
Vitamin D is the #1 nutrient deficiency in America, although it's not really proper to call it a nutrient because it's a hormone that's produced in your skin made out of cholesterol when you go out in the sun. But since we have difficulty getting enough sun exposure, we now use it as a supplement. Vitamin D is the only substance we know that has a receptor on every single cell in the body. It's a major hormone in the body. It controls inflammation, enhances immune function. But in terms of dementia, it's been highly linked to cognitive decline. So over dozens and dozens of studies for the last 15 years, we've shown that people with higher blood levels of vitamin D do better cognitively. So we'd like to get in enough vitamin D as a supplement to keep those levels well up into the high end of the normal range, and that seems like it's going to be a benefit. We don't have the studies to show what would happen if someone kept their blood level up for, let's say, 20 years into their elderhood. The studies that we have show that people that don't have enough have problems, and people that have more do better. That's what we know so far, but it's pretty obvious. My sense is that conventional medicine is making great strides in dealing with Alzheimer's and other dementias, and alternative medicine likewise. And I feel like we're really close to cracking the code. I have a colleague that specializes in meditation for dementia, and he's been showing some great results with various meditation techniques. And then we have these various nutrients and things like this, and then some newer drugs that are being developed and lifestyle changes. And I think we're getting close.
I would agree with you. Just one final question on vitamin D3. Do you have a range that you like to see the people you work with in? I know that the range on blood work is between 30 and 100 nanomoles, I believe. Is 60, 70, 80, 40? What is the range that you like to see your patients in for vitamin D?
I like 75, and I discovered that just clinically that people seem to top out there and do the best across the board. That's the upper end of the physiological limit. That is, if you take people and run them around in the sun naked until their blood tops out at the place where the body wants to sustain it, it's usually right around 70, 75. That pushes it right up to the edge. And that's the problem with the range, is that 30 is the bottom end of the normal range. So if you have 31, you're considered normal, and conventional medical doctors won't treat you, but that's only that's 2.5 times less than the amount we want to have for ideal functioning. So I like 75. I'm not going to argue with 60, maybe even 50 would be adequate. But the Vitamin D Council, shortly after I came to that conclusion, came to the same conclusion. And a number of consumer organizations have said that right around 75 is the optimal level.
Yeah, that's where I like to be around. And I generally tell my patients I want to see them right around 60, but 75 would be just fine with me as well.
Yeah.
If anybody wanted to get in touch with you, KP, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
My website is very easy to remember. It's just my name, the initials KP, like kangaroo and pumpkin, and then Khalsa, Khalsa, kpkhalsa.com. They'll get right in.
Beautiful. Now, this is one of my most favorite interviews I've done, primarily because you gave such practical information that people can just start using as soon as they hear this podcast. Do you have any last words for us or the audience?
Well, I just want to encourage people that it sure seems possible now, knowing what we know, that by getting adequate sleep, reducing stress, and eating a diet of a wide variety of minimally processed foods, we can keep our marbles as long as possible. And then if you want to study this further, you can get into much more detailed information about various other herbs, and you can focus on this a lot more, and sure seems like it's going to work out very, very well. My website would have a lot more information about those kinds of ideas.
Great. Again, I thank you so very much for being on our podcast. My name is Dr. Noah DeCoyer, your co-host, and you're listening to Beyond Your Wildest Genes. If you like what you've heard today, please share this with your friends and family. Encourage them to subscribe on iTunes. You could sign up for our weekly email at www.centerforepigeneticexpression.com, and please let me encourage you to check out our first project/summit at www.painreliefproject.com. Thank you, and as my oldest son Hayden says, be awesome and never unawesome.